Oh, great. I can see the numbers going up. We'll kick off. So we have loads to cover today. And welcome everyone, and welcome the speakers and the panelists in today's webinar. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. So please do check that you can hear me. I am speaking. If you cannot, just play around with your audio or rejoin the webinar. But anyway, the recording will be sent in the next couple of days. Please do use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We'll answer some throughout the webinar, but most of them at the end. And anything we don't manage to go through, we'll cover in a follow-up blog. And yes, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to everyone. So to kick us off, we'll do a little Mentimeter. If you can go over to this link, and we'll have a few questions. First one is how far you are in your project. Okay, still thinking. Some of you still thinking. Okay, already questions. Analyzing, great. Well, now is a good time to see how you can use CausalMap, even if you're still thinking. Very good. Okay, so maybe you'll get some ideas if you're still thinking and planning. You might get some ideas of how you might use some data, collect some data, use CausalMap to do some analysis. Excellent. All right, for everyone that's joining, let me repost the Menti. Fantastic. All right, so most people are in the thinking. Some have a question. Some are running the interviews. Well done, you. I hope that's going well. Analyzing, that's also quite challenging, but I'm sure you're doing well. Cool. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. So the next question is really about what your biggest challenges are. So maybe as you're thinking about your research question, or you're analyzing, doing the interviews, collecting the data, and mostly in the context of sort of using causal relationships in your data. What are some of the challenges? Especially if you've tried to do some linking, some causal linking in your qualitative data. That's interesting. The analysis is challenging. The amount of data. The time is always a challenge. We either have too little, or no, actually not either. We have too little or not enough. Doing the interviews, statistical analysis. Oh, that's great. Organizing the data, reliability, generalizing, narrative analysis. Interesting, amazing. Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing your challenges. It feels like everyone has slightly different ones, but at the same time, they're quite overlapping. Fantastic. Great. Okay, as we're still thinking about our challenges, I hope some of them might be answered in today's webinar with Steve, Hannah, and Fiona. And so I will stop sharing my screen and just hand over to you all.
Hi, great. Thanks very much. That's a really nice introduction, and we're very grateful to Sage for this opportunity. I'm Steve. I started off as a psychologist originally. I got my PhD doing researching post-traumatic stress in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I ended up working in all kinds of different projects all over the world. I was originally doing quantitative research, but I felt that that was only really scratching the surface, and the numbers were all a lot of fun, but I wanted to know more about the stories behind the numbers. to understand really what people think causes what. So what are the reasons for different things that are interesting. So with Fiona, I founded Causal Map Limited. We're a very small and specialist startup. And we've had a little bit of a leg up from Sage with winning the concept grant last year. So Fiona.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, I'm Fiona. I run a small consultancy which specialises in qualitative social research. We're based in the city of Bath in the UK, and we're called Bath Social and Development Research. We conduct a lot of in-depth interviews with people to find out what they think affects behaviours and actions in their lives and livelihoods. And we've always used a form of causal mapping to analyse and visualise the results from these interviews. But until I joined forces with Steve, there was no piece of software that I could use to do the whole process of coding the links together. So now there is, and I look forward to sharing Causal Map with you all today. Over to you, Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah. So I work primarily with Fiona at Bath SDR, but I also work closely with Steve on the educational materials for the Causal Map app. With my role with Bath SDR, I use the app a lot. So I bring that knowledge and expertise as a user to my work with Steve and the app.
Thank you, Hannah. So today we're going to refer to an example research project, which I worked on with an international non-governmental organisation who work on aid and development. And Steve has kindly put up a map, which you don't need to worry too much about now, but this is a sort of example of some of the outputs that we get. So for us, the driver of doing this project is the challenges that come around doing aid and development. Delivering the right sort of aid that works is not straightforward. And it's really important to know what people are really thinking and doing in the areas where development work is happening. So this particular organisation that we worked with are interested in finding out more about changes in the health and nutrition of families with children under the age of 5. And this was in an East African country. So they wanted to understand what might be driving those changes, including the use of new and different crop varieties, farming techniques, and the role of mothers in decision-making, particularly in relation to new ideas around food choices in pregnancy and early childhood, and hygiene practices within the family. So we worked with a group of researchers who conducted in-depth interviews with parents from 48 different households in rural areas, as well as doing some focus groups. And they were probing for information about any changes over the previous 2 years in the health of parents and children, their access to food, and decisions about who eats what and when. So we coded the transcripts from these interviews, looking for links that people made between cause and effect, and building up detailed causal maps, like the one we can see here, which were aggregated across the whole data set. So we were able to pull together all the common links to produce visual summaries of people's perceptions of the main drivers of change in their households and in their communities. But we were also able to delve deeper into why different types of respondents might have different experiences. So this map that's up now is a very, very high level, just the top 3 drivers across the whole data set, but you get much bigger maps and much more detailed maps if you zoom in. So we can look at patterns where lots of links between factors are repeated and see what types of respondents made those claims and what or who may be missing from those stories. We can also trace the full stories that people make along quite long chains. For example, from learning about new farming techniques all the way through to a more balanced diet, with different pathways in between. So for some, this includes improved yields, selling more crops, and using the money to buy different types of food. For others, this may also lead to improved yields, but then go on to an improved ability to store food and use that food for personal consumption. So the staff working in these areas were able to use the individual and aggregated maps, metrics that we can pull out, and original quotes to capture the main enablers and barriers to positive change. And that meant they could tweak and optimize the program that was being rolled out in other areas in other countries. So Steve's now going to talk about causal mapping as a theoretical concept and a research tool. And then Hannah's going to do a brief walkthrough of the Causal Map app. If you want to find out more about use cases, such as the example I've just discussed, we will be posting links to case studies at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Fiona. That's great. So well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit now just about what is causal mapping, because it's maybe not a method or an approach that you've heard of. Now, nor had we, actually, to be honest, although we've been doing it, the two of us, coming from a different background for quite a few years. So it has a long tradition, even under the name causal mapping, starting from Robert Axelrod in 1976, and various other papers and researchers have been working in the social sciences and humanities and beyond. But it's sometimes under the name causal mapping, sometimes under the name cognitive mapping, and sometimes under other names. And it's never really sort of caught on in the sense that you've got professors of causal mapping or anything like that. There are a few textbooks. So what is a causal map? It's basically, there's two boxes joined by an arrow, and the arrow means that somebody claims there's some kind of causal influence that X has on Y. Normally, you can make maps which for each person, which are a bit more complicated, include more factors. Here we've got person P on the left and person Q on the right. We've got different but overlapping beliefs. And when you combine them, that gets interesting. So you can see that, well, P and Q are thinking about the same things, but they think about them in different ways, and they understand they have somewhat overlapping and somewhat similar ideas about what causes what in their worlds. So if you're going to collect data for causal mapping, and you can use primary data that you collect yourself, or you can use secondary data, you can use comparable or very different kinds of sources. You can have documents, you can mix those up with like emails or interviews you conduct, especially for your research. Normally you have between, let's say, 5 and 50 sources that you're analysing. So it's a sort of medium amount of data. It's not big data, but it's not case studies. It's not individual case studies either. You normally got many claims. They can be of quite variable quality, because when ordinary people talk, they don't talk about necessary insufficient conditions or exact parameters or probabilities. They talk very generally. And causal mapping is good at capturing this kind of lowest common denominator idea of what a causal link is. Normally, we don't work with a fixed code book, but normally your code book is evolving as you're working and as you're coding. So the heart of the matter is what we call causal QDA, causal qualitative data analysis. And if you take a sentence like, oh, after that it was different because COVID meant we spent more time at home. That's a sentence from a recent transcript that we had. So in traditional QDA, you make connections between non-causal themes. So you highlight the theme COVID, which comes up a lot, and the theme more time at home that comes up a lot. And then retrospectively, you can make a link between the two and analyze, or in a different software or the same software, you can maybe make that link and analyze that link maybe in a network mapping software. But when you're doing causal mapping natively, you, in one single act, you find the quote and you say at the same time, what's the influence and what's the consequence, what's the like cause and the effect in that quote. And you click a button and you want whatever software or tool you're using to immediately record all of that for you, as this is a link between the two things without you having to kind of do that manually. That's what we'd like in causal mapping software. So I should say, when we're doing a causal mapping, it's a qualitative approach. So we're not trying to model the world. We're not trying to predict what will happen down the line, or say, here's a feedback loop, and that's going to make this go up and that go down. And we're not doing econometrics. We're not doing fuzzy cognitive mapping. What we're interested in is what people think about the world, and what's shared between groups of people and what's different about the way they think about the world. So it's important to remember it is a qualitative approach. We've got lots of metrics and numbers and tables if you want them, but we're not actually trying to do any modeling. So when you've done a lot of that, you've coded up a lot of transcripts, you'll find you've got lots and lots of factors. You've been trying to be disciplined with your code book, but you've still probably got hundreds of factors. So you want tools that make it easy to edit and consolidate your factors into some kind of system. And you want to, partly because you want to develop a more parsimonious theory, I guess, about what causes what. And you also want to, you see, this is an example of like actually a fragment, a section of a real life project, the Fiona's project. And here you can see there's lots of stuff. So how do we get any meaning out of this hairball? So what you want is filters that you can apply, like algorithms that ask and answer questions like, for example, starting from these three inputs of interest on the left-hand side, what are the different causal pathways that people say for them leads to increased or improved income? And then you can say, I want to know how many people mentioned each link, or how many times was each link mentioned, and lots of questions like that. But what's great about and important about causal mapping is you always know what's the original quote. You want to always be able to drill back to the original quote. So who exactly made this particular causal claim, and who are they, and what village they live in, or how old are they, and so forth. And I should say that the causal mapping, so you're down and dirty with the data. It takes a bit of time. You've got to actually read your transcript, understand, highlight. We are, of course, introducing some NLP and some automated ways to code the data, which is kind of quicker. But I think as academic researchers, that's a bit of a diversion, because you actually want to be reading your data and creating causal maps by hand. So that was the challenge we had. That was causal mapping as a challenge. To answer solve some of those problems, we developed the Causal Map app, and Hannah is now our in-house expert at telling you what Causal Map app actually looks like. So over to you, Hannah.
Great, thanks, Steve. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. There we go. So I'm going to talk you through the process that Fiona and other users of the app go through when coding a project. So this is to help you understand the Causal Map app. So we're going to go through uploading, coding, and then some basic tables and filtered maps. This is just to give you a flavor of the app. It's, we're not expecting you to immediately after this be able to code your own study in the app, but we have lots of other resources to help you do that. We have a tutorial, we have quizzes, and we have an extensive guide. So first, I'm going to start with giving you a quick tour of the app. When you log in, you'll see a screen like this, like mine. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see this list of icons. This eye is there to link to various pages that will help you get to know the app. And then we have things like this icon here, which is to change the permissions of any file. You can create a blank file, copy a file, and download your file as an Excel. And this is really useful because you can download it and do further analysis in Excel, or use it alongside other tools. And then these icons here help you manage your file and account. So below that, you'll see there's a drop-down list, and I've already loaded up Fiona's project. But for new users of the app, there are a range of projects and example files in there for you to play around and just have a go with, really. Below that, you'll see there's a statements toggle. So right now I'm viewing many coded links. I'm viewing all of the coded links that were in Fiona's project. If I wanted to code, I would go to one statement at a time. So going to one statement at a time allows you to just see that statement, and also go to the functions that you need for coding. So let me just switch servers. So you'll see when you go onto the Causal Map app, there's a variety of different icons, and those icons will indicate what permissions you have. A green lock shows you can edit it. A red lock means you can't edit it, but you can view it still, and you can have a look around. And then we've got the orange pages, which will allow you to copy the file. So moving on to these icons at the top, we have the interactive view, and it's here that you'll be able to edit your links. You can see I can kind of move these around, and if I hover over it, it'll give me more details about that link, and I can edit those links. I can edit factors. In the print view is where I would find more formatted maps. So these are where Fiona would have found her maps for the report, and they're the ones that Fiona and Steve just showed you. They would have found them from the print tab. So then we have the reports tab, and in there is text about the app and about your particular data set. And you can just copy and paste that and put it into your reports and studies So that's a really helpful way of looking at your data, and it's a good place to start with your analysis. Next, we have the factor editor, where you can edit factors in bulk, the tables tab, which we will go through later, and then a variety of different tabs that help you manage your account and file. So the first step for Fiona was to upload her data. And to upload your data in the CausalMap app, you simply click this button here. This will create a new blank map file, and it will allow you to, that's a good base for you to upload your data into. And when I click this upload button here, you'll see there's a variety of different ways, of different formats that are compatible with the app. Fiona used the standard format Excel because she collected her data in Excel, but you could also use text documents or PDFs if that's how you've collected your data. So as you can see, Fiona's information and data is already here and it's already coded, so I don't need to go through those steps. But I am going to show you how to code a statement. And as I said before, to code a statement, you need to be on the one statement. And this will show the statements one by one. Just give that a minute to catch up with my internet. So the key thing when coding a statement is understanding the context. And as Steve mentioned, you're always able to get back to that, to those quotes when you're in the interactive tab. And in the statements tab, there's the function, the option of looking at the source data, which you've imported. So for example, Fiona, as she mentioned, was interested in the gender dynamics, and so she uploaded information about whether the respondent was female or male. So that kind of information is always there for you to check in on, and Fiona would have been tabbing that open and close while she was coding. I believe Fiona also put in information such as the province and the village. So this was information that Fiona was able to look at throughout the coding process, because we understand that this context is very important when coding.
Hannah, do you want me to take over, because it seems like you're having problems with your internet?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe that's a better idea. I don't know whether it's hang on, I'll just go to the right bit to need to find where that here we go. Need to find a bit for sharing my screen.
Oh, I think it's just kicked in, Steve. So I clicked too many times, but I should be able to get back to one. Okay, great. So as I mentioned before, the one statement is how you get the code. And this is the information I was mentioning that Fiona would be checking while she's coding. And you can see there as well that you can go to different, you can add memos to your links into your statements. And these are just reminders that you can have, or you can also filter by these at a later point. So here you can see this statement's already coded, and it's color coordinated, so we can see exactly what part of this statement this causal claim came from. And so I'm going to move on to the next statement using the navigation bar. And I've cleared this statement so that I can demonstrate how to code. So here the respondent has said, we changed our behaviors because we learned from our training session with organization 1 that the way one behaves contributes to a health status. Now we wash our hands after visiting the washrooms and before we eat. We also wash our pans after cooking. I've noticed my family gets sick less now. So here we can see a clear causal claim. Organisation 1 and their training has led to this family washing their hands more, washing their pans more, and then this has led to improved health. So to code this, we want to code all of the relevant part of this statement. So this is the first part of the causal claim. And then add the influence factor. So here we have Organisation 1's training. And you can see as soon as I start typing in Organisation 1, this suggestion pops up. It says receive training. And this is here because I've used this factor label elsewhere in this file. And as you code and add factors, your codebook will grow. So you'll always be able to refer back to that, and it keeps your coding consistent. So to add this, I'm just going to click with my mouse, but I could also just press enter on my keyboard. And then the consequence factor, we've got 2 here. So we've got washing hands, and I can just enter on my keyboard, and washing pans. There we go. So I could simply save this, or I could click save and chain. And what this save and chain icon does is it takes the consequence factors that I have, wash hands and wash pans, and there we go. It makes them the influence factors. So we can see that here. And now I want to take this part of it, the second part of this causal statement, make sure that's highlighted, and then the consequence is improved health. And as you can see, improved health has been mentioned already in this file, so I can click and save that. And now you can see in, now you can see in the right-hand panel, we've got a clear map showing how Organisation 1 and their training has led to washing pans and washing hands for this respondent, and then this has led to improved health. So Fiona and most users of the app go through a stage of reviewing and editing their factors and merging them. So you could edit them in this tab, in the interactive tab, simply by hovering and clicking here, or by bulk in the factor editor, which Steve mentioned earlier. So of course, after the coding stage is when Fiona started her analysis. And using filtered maps and tables, which have a range of different metrics, helped Fiona find those main stories of change. So we have a variety of preset maps and tables in the app, and these are good as a starting point for any user really to have an overview and a better understanding of their data. So I'm first going to show you the maps. So to get to these presets, you simply have to open the dashboard by clicking on this medallion here. Or you could also press Alt-Q on your keyboard to open it. And here we'll see this long list of presets. So here, these are called complete views because they'll completely replace whatever I have in here and delete any of the filters I've already applied. You can see that they have different icons next to each other, and that's because a grey icon means that Fiona is a custom view. Fiona saved this to this file because it was relevant to her particular project. You can see here there's a province comparison and a women only overview, which makes sense of Fiona's project. We also have these starred ones, which are recommended ones that the app gives to any file because we think they will be interesting ways of looking at your data. You can see there's an icon next to them as well, and this tells you which tab in the app you're going to go to. So here the printer icon will take you to the printer tab, and then we've got tables and the interactive tab as well. You'll notice that there's a little share button here, and that's because you can copy a link to this specific view and share that. And that was really useful for Fiona because she was able to share those links with the organization and have a discussion around those even before the report was published. And you can see there when I hover over, there's a description appears of that view, so I know exactly what's going to be applied. So I'm going to apply this one here. It's an overview, and once I click that, you can see that everything in the right hand panel is going to change. There we go, and I've got an overview that looks similar to one of the maps that Fiona was showing earlier. So here we can see things like increased knowledge has led to improved farming techniques, planting new crops, and this has led to farm production. So this is a really useful map that you might want to use in your reports, and you could save this using this button here, or you could save it in the dashboard here. And you can see just above this, there's a section called add-ons, and add-ons add on to your existing view. So here you can see Fiona's saved a custom one, but there's also lots of recommended ones. For example, I might want to add borders to my factor edit, to my factor labels here, and I could just do that by clicking on the teal borders. And then my map will be updated with those borders. There we go. So Fiona also created her own maps from scratch using these buttons here, and edited the preset maps using these buttons here, and then shared them and saved them in the same way. In Fiona's write-up, she also used the tables, and tables are useful as both to put into reports and as an analysis tool to compare different aspects or different demographics within your data. So, as I said before, they also have presets. So you can get those presets by clicking and just scrolling down and finding the ones that icons, or going to a specific table tab like the factors and then clicking on the presets. And then this will be filtered and just show you the table presets. So I'm going to go to the factors table preset. That's that. And now you can see that I'm being shown the top factor labels. I can see that 19 respondents have mentioned improved health, and this is the most popular factor label. And that's unsurprising, really, given the project. So here I could filter the factor labels. So I could, for example, filter the label. I could look at all factor labels that have the word health in. I could also do the same with factor memos. And I can change the ordering of this here. So I could, if I wanted to, I could look at the ones that had the least amount of mentions. I can create more complicated ones using the pivot column. And in these columns, I can add a variety of different columns. We have a lot of different metrics in the CausalMap app. So there's lots of different ways to look at your data, and you can add those there. There's also the ability to filter your table, according to these filters over here. So if I click that, I would then only see the top 15 links and the factor labels involved in them. So Fiona put some of these in her report and changed how they looked using these buttons here to suit her needs, and then saved them as a picture and just put them straight in the report. And then I believe Fiona also downloaded them as an Excel as well, and then did further analysis in them as an Excel. So that's just a really brief overview of the CausalMap app and how Fiona and other users would go through a project using it. But I'm going to pass back to Steve now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hannah. So I'm going to now, hopefully, if I can find the right button, share my screen to just finish off a couple of minutes about what it's like to sign up for CausalMap and how much it costs and all those kinds of things. So when you might choose CausalMap for your research, it's obviously not for everybody. We find that, as you probably know, if you're doing qualitative research, it can be quite difficult to get started. Like, what are even my questions exactly? What am I trying to find out here? When you're doing causal mapping, the focus is on causal questions, like what do people think causes what? So it does kind of give you a template for how to do your research. And if you're using the app, it even gives you buttons to help you answer some of the questions, at least to get you going on the direction to take with your research. In any case, what causes what, or what people think causes what, is normally quite often, cutting to the chase, what you really want to know. You'd also use CausalMap if you've got a lot of semi-structured or unstructured narrative data from many different sources, maybe different kinds of sources. It's useful if you want to have visuals like these maps that tell you this left to right story. And there might be other kinds of links, but you'll find that a lot of mapping tools give you a sort of swirly, circular based kind of visualization because they're very focused on systems, and that's all very well, but sometimes not everything's a system. And often there's a kind of roughly a left to right story going on with roughly a beginning and an end. If you've got that kind of question, then causal map and causal mapping can be very useful. If your research questions are specifically about how do people think about the world and how it works, what kind of structures do they have in their head when they're explaining what causes what? Do women and men think the same? Do children and adults think the same? All those kinds of questions, causal mapping is very useful for. And if you want to know how much evidence is there for different kinds of causal pathways, how much evidence is there that this intervention influenced this outcome compared to perhaps some other intervention that influences that outcome. So the CausalMap App has a lot of special algorithms and filters which are actually open source, which you can use to analyze your file. It's useful for sharing maps and even specific filters with other people they can view online for free. You can calculate different kinds of network metrics and causal mapping metrics if that's your thing. You can always export all of your data as Excel so it remains your data that you can see. It's always auto-saving in the background, and you can always restore any past version from I think any point in time, like sort of 2 years ago in the middle of the day, I want to restore that particular version. But you do need a good, as we saw during Hannah's presentation, you do need a good internet connection. And something to mention is you only can import plain text into causal maps, so you can't code like audio files or videos or anything like that, and you can't do numerical modeling. So compared with other tools, and there isn't really anything else like it that we're aware of. There are other causal mapping tools, but you can't do causal coding, you can't do QDA in them. And of course, there's lots of other amazing QDA tools which are much more sophisticated than causal map, but you can't do this actual coding of causal links while you're doing your narrative analysis. And there's plenty of other tools that are also related to causal mapping worth a mention, but won't really help you with the causal mapping task, the main causal mapping task. So causal map is free to use. You can view and analyze any file for free forever. If you want to do coding to code your own file, you can try it out with a file up to 50 links. That's enough for an interesting demonstration or to show your supervisor. But it's probably not enough to do a whole piece of research. So if you want to go beyond your 50 links, then there are 3 different subscription levels: small, medium, and unlimited, which vary in the amount of files you're allowed to use. So with the unlimited package, for example, you can have any number of files with any number of links in them. And you also find that it's cheaper if you get a lot cheaper if you get an annual subscription if you're doing you're going to be working on your project for a few months. And if you, we're happy to announce that participants in this webinar, if you use the code SAGECM23, then you'll get 50% off any annual subscription. And I think that's about it. Get signed up at our website, CausalMap.app, and we'll let you know about future webinars where we'll get together with yourself and other colleagues to go through maybe some interesting features or problems with using the app. And I think that's it. So we can see there's already some questions in the Q&A, and perhaps we'll go back to Daniela and Michael to help us through that process, and I'll stop the sharing here.
So so there are a few questions I think Fiona, you've been answering, and Steve, you've been answering some, so great, thank you so much. So I want to pick up Nin's question. So could we use the source count to essentially argue the strength of causation? I know you said there's no statistical stuff, but he's asking, is there an algorithm of some sort in the background that can support this?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Source count's a really interesting metric, of course, but we discourage people from saying that that's a proxy for causal strength. We think that if you're interested in what's the strength of the link? Is it very small, or is it 0.2 or 0.7 or 0.9 or something? You're probably not really wanting to do causal mapping. Then you probably want to turn to something like fuzzy cognitive maps or something like that. Because we're not trying to model the real world and see kind of, if this goes up, does that go up and that go down? That's a different kind of question. You could use it as a proxy. Of course, what we do at the end, like what Fiona was doing in that particular example, you certainly can then say, well, a lot of people think this is relevant, a lot of people think that's relevant. So it could be that's relevant, but that's not something the Causal Map app or causal mapping itself gives you like a free pass to do. Then you have to sort of sit and think, well, I think that probably is like a relevant effect or even a large effect. But I think it's a mistake to go from the number of people who believe something to say that's necessarily a strong link. It might be in some cases, but not in every case. And I say also there's
a question from Leslie. Leslie
Mm-hmm.
Wood. Has this been used for analyzing social media data? Is there a way to import Twitter data?
That's also a very good question. We've had that a couple of times. Yes, of course. I mean, there's the Twitter fire hose. I think that's changing actually, and the access to the API has changed in the last couple of weeks. But assuming it's still possible to download it for free, or if you think, hey, I'll get a developer API, if you can download that data as a CSV file or as an Excel file, then you can totally import that data into Causal Map, and you could then analyze tweet by tweet. The thing is that most tweets don't really probably include that many causal claims. So you probably want to narrow your search to tweets maybe in a thread or with a particular hashtag, Twitter hashtag, that included that as had a causal story going on in the background, like what do you think is the reason for that? Something like climate change, for example. Then that might be interesting. Otherwise, you might find you're trawling through a lot of stuff which is not really causal in the first place. But yeah, in principle, simply download your data from Twitter and upload it into Causal Map as an Excel file.
So would you say it works better for longer text, or?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think it's fine. We've used this kind of approach absolutely to analyze quite short answers. And of course, it's interesting as well, if you've got data from a source like Twitter, then hopefully you've got some demographics as well. So you might see continent or country, or maybe even age, that kind of thing. So you can, Causal Map understands a lot of, or any kind of metadata you want to give it. So you could then say things like, show me only, here's the map, but show me only the young people, or show me only the old people. If you're doing, I sort of hesitate with very big data, because at the moment this kind of coding isn't automated. So you'd find if you're thinking about 10,000 or 1 million tweets, then it might be a bit tiresome to go through it all manually, and it's maybe not the right thing to do. Causal mapping is probably more interesting when you've got, 50 sources, 500 sources with maybe, 1,000 phrases or 100 phrases, or that kind of order of magnitude, where you're really getting sort of into the nitty-gritty of what people are saying about what, rather than, if you're going to do like bulk big data, then you probably wouldn't need something like Causal Map. You perhaps use a different tool, like Python-based tool or something like that.
Great. I think Min had a follow-up on 1 versus 19, but Fiona answered that question. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, there's so much to say about the numbers and the qual versus quant, and it's difficult to go into much detail here. So I have pasted a link to a paper that we wrote at Bath SDR about this, because we're constantly writing about this. In all of our reports, are trying to tread the careful balance between quantifying qualitative data. We feel really strongly that the work that we're doing is actually about bringing to the fore people's experiences and voices. So at no point do we want to suggest that numbers can take away from any of that. So it has to be a really good balance in how you present it. But what it does mean is that we can cut to the chase a bit quicker about the big stories, what's happening. And so that is to give you a sense of what's going on, what are the stronger links, what are the weaker links, and then you dive into the text that sits behind that to understand why that's happening. So we would never talk about percentages of people or extrapolate from there. So you need to be careful with that. And I have posted a couple of times a link to a paper on our website, and Steve's written some really great blogs about that as well. So I would encourage you to have a look on the Causal Map website for the recent blogs on that.
Thank you, Fiona. There are a couple of questions about the how this compares to other apps, and I think you touched upon the differences with QDA, Steve. So the two questions are: how does this app compare with Nudist or other qual data approaches? And then can you please expand on the different rationales between natively causal mapping compared to the traditional QDA analysis software?
Can I just come back to what Fiona was saying? Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I mean, of course, sometimes you're using numbers when you're doing qualitative data analysis. I mean, for example, the maps that you get, you can use metrics like betweenness to see which factors are kind of most central or most important in the causal story. It's just a number, but you're not using that number to generalize to a population or to say that means that kind of all farmers in Uganda think like this or something like that. So numbers always have a place, but maybe not the place that that you were feeling they might have. Yeah, so the point about, I mean, obviously there's great QDA software out there, which is to take up also one of the previous questions as well, which have got much bigger companies behind them than us, which have had a lot longer time to do their development. We're specifically really focused on this idea of causal connections. And as far as I'm aware, but of course I could be wrong, because I don't keep up with all of them all of the time, it's totally possible to, in a normal QDA app, to highlight your causal factors. So like COVID, and then staying at home, and then feeling depressed, and then whatever. And then either in the app itself using an add-on, or then exporting that data and then making the links, and then visualizing those links maybe in Kumu or something like that, or Gephi. It's totally possible to, and people have done that, to do causal mapping using that kind of approach. What causal map offers is, causal mapping offers is a way to do that where it's all in one place. And so you can, as you're coding, you can say, I'm not sure I'm using the right labels here. Let's have a look what the map looks like just by looking at the map, rather than having to sort of then stop and then export and create links separately and all that kind of thing. But I'd love to know, maybe someone else has recently developed something that kind of ticks that box, but I don't think so. That's my sincere belief.
And so there's another question also similar to comparing to Atlas DI. So I presume is the same.
Yes, I think it's the same. I mean, it could be that one of the many players in the QDA field has enabled this kind of functionality, but to the very best of my knowledge, that's not the case. So what you'd have to do to repeat a normal QDA, what you'd have to do is highlight the individual factors and then link them up, whereas as Hannah showed you, what you do in Causal Map is just highlight the whole text and then say what's going on, and that's it.
There's an important question here about data protection. So what happens to the uploaded data around sort of confidentiality and privacy?
Yes, good question. We ourselves generally work with relatively anonymized data sets anyway, just because that's good practice. But the data is stored in Amazon S3 buckets, which are encrypted by default. So I mean, it's not possible to kind of, even if you were to hack into Amazon, you couldn't then read the data, and the data is encrypted in transit with SSL protocols. So we have had a security audit, and we don't think it's possible for anyone to read anyone else's data. But we don't have like certification from the US government or anything like that, because that's an enormously expensive process to go through to get that kind of certification. Yeah, we believe that the data is secure.
Great, thank you. So a question from Kirsten Roger. So you said you got the grant last year. Has it been trialed a fair bit, or is it still quite new? Also, I suppose, okay, so also available in Canadian dollars.
Right. Well, the Canadian dollars, I'm afraid not. It's only, I'm not sure, do we offer sign-ups in dollars?
No, I have a thing in the chat that at the moment we don't have it available in other currencies. You can pay in whatever currency you like via Stripe, but unfortunately it's not available. It's not priced differently at the moment, but we may consider that in the future.
Yes. Has it been trialed a fair bit? Well, that's it's a good question. It's kind of weird. Yeah, it's been used like loads, like all the time. And we've got like, there's a small circle of, let's say, 5, 15, 20 people at one time who are using it for quite specific and quite complicated research projects for international organizations, but it's not something that's been used by hundreds of people like yourselves, like these, the first time today that we've really spoken to a large audience of hundreds of academics and students. And so that's what the SAGE grant has helped to give us a leg up to do. So from that point of view, it's quite new, but from the point of view of experience in using the app and kind of what filters you need and which button do you have in which place, we've had, yes, a lot of experience, and it's going on right now. Should I take the next one?
Sure.
Right, so the next one about already coded data. Yes, you can. There is, if you click on the, or look at the guide, it tells you more about it, or in the input panel, upload panel, there is a section for uploading what's called an edge list. So just like from and to. So if you've simply got a list saying like this leads to that, 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 with hundreds or thousands of links, then you can import that. And in a way you say, why bother? Because you can do the same with Kuma or Gephi. But if you're interested specifically in causal mapping type questions, like tracing paths from one particular node or factor to another node or factor kind of down the chain, then that might be something you're interested in. It's not the primary purpose of the Causal Map App. And Herman says, so it forces the analyst exactly to code material based on identifying causal factors and consequences already at the stage of early coding. That's absolutely right, yes. You can, of course, change and modify and refactor your factors at any point, and you will do as you're going along to kind of reorganize your code book. But it does force you to immediately say what's the cause and what's the effect in this case. It is possible, because people said to us, oh, but I so want to use Causal Map App, but I was going to use NVivo, and like there are certain themes or issues that come up that are not actually causal statements. So I'd really like to be able to code those while I'm doing it. And you can do that too. We call it plain coding. So if your interest is kind of 80–90% in the causal pathways, but you don't want to lose things that sometimes come up, which are just, someone just says, for example, oh, there's a lot of inflation at the moment. It's not a causal claim, but you know that somebody else is going to say, well, inflation leads to poverty, and you really want to code the fact that this person said there's a lot of inflation. So you can do that. It's called a plain coding. But if all you want to do is that kind of thing, then you wouldn't be using Causal Map in the first place, because it literally does, generally speaking, force you to isolate the causal claims and to code those straight away.
Olga is asking, how can you delete the data you uploaded?
Oh, if it's in terms of privacy, that's you can, yeah, you can simply delete. You can go into your manage the file button, and you can then simply delete that data, delete that file, and that file then no longer exists.
Great. All right. So Margarita is asking, do you have an example applied to systematic review, scoping review, etc.?
We've got a couple of examples, I think, on the resources page of the website in Zotero. It depends how systematic you want to be. If you're thinking very much kind of in a numerical point of view, and you've got like a because systematic review in some disciplines can mean very much kind of a sheet, yeah, so plus and minus and this and the effect size and all of that stuff. I don't think I would use Causal Map for that. But if you, what has been done is, for example, we're mainly in the project evaluation space, evaluating like international development projects, for example. So a meta-analysis, so for example, 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 evaluation reports, and then absolutely I would use that to, in fact, most of the time we haven't causally coded the entire reports in each case. We've mainly causally coded the summary or the executive summary or the conclusion sections. That's absolutely been done, but it's not necessarily what I call a systematic review, more like a meta-analysis. If you want to be like super systematic, like a medical trial, then probably you're going to be thinking with a much more strict and quantitative approach with things like effect sizes, which you probably wouldn't bother with. Of course, it's not really the right tool for that.
Great. So we have Ricardo's asking, sorry if this question was already answered. Is qualitative information suitable with causal connection? Isn't causality a more suitable concept for quantitative research?
Yes, very interesting question, and something we do get quite a lot. I think your causality, I mean, in this century, I think causality is very much in the forefront, has become, again, with that name as well, very much in the interest, both on, it's actually probably the statisticians who started this revival around 2000 and onwards, that yeah, absolutely, causality is something we can talk about. And I was just rereading Gary Gertz's paper on two cultures, which is like a sort of seminal work about qualitative versus quantitative, where they very much made it clear that most or an awful lot nowadays of qualitative research is exactly about causal pathways. It's just like I say, we're not modeling, we're not trying to say, oh, actually, you know, when inflation goes up, then sort of purchasing power goes down by a factor of 0.2 or something like that. We're not doing that kind of modeling. We're doing modeling of what people say in their words and in their beliefs and in their narratives, what are the causal connections in the world. And that's absolutely something that qualitative researchers should be interested in.
Great. I think we'll have time for one more question. Let's go with a big one. How do you define causal relationships?
It's actually not that hard, because people, when they're talking about what causes what, it's amazing how relatively easy it is to work out what's kind of a causal claim. We're not talking about absolute determination or any specific theoretical definition of causation. But if you ask, for example, ChatGPT, tell me what are the causes and effects in this text, it does it pretty much the same as probably an undergraduate student of physics would do, pretty much the same as what a postgraduate student of history would say. It's not, we've got a pretty good common understanding of what a causal influence is. And it's the less you philosophize about it, the better and the easier it is to just say, yeah, they're saying that influences that, without thinking about necessary conditions or inus conditions or anything like that. So if we don't worry about it and just start coding, you'll find it's quite easy to identify a causal claim. I mean, that's perhaps a bit controversial what I said, but the fact is that you can get people to agree looking at a text on roughly what the causal claims are.
Great, thank you so much. We'll close at this point, and there are a few questions left, but we'll take them later. So thank you so much, Steve, Hannah, and Fiona, for a perfect introduction into causal mapping for qualitative data and showing us how to use Causal Map. I'm loving it because it's, you know, bringing different types of sources together and analyzing them. That's essentially, I think, every qualitative social scientist's dream. Thank you so much again. And for everyone, thank you for joining. We'll share the recording in the next few days and any of the links that from Steve, Fiona, and Hannah in a follow-up email. Have a great rest of the day.
Sage for hosting us as well. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And thanks everyone for your questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.